we are. Okay, great. Well, we're just going to let more folks join as they hop on. But thanks again for being here this evening. And class that I've been thinking about for a while. And this is a lifestyle. This is something that I've been doing, building my own practice of for quite a while. And wow, hey, in the last 2 years, one never would have imagined that the events that have occurred have taken place. And yes, we can come at it from a sense of like fear, doom and gloom, the end of the world, we need to prep. But I'd like to, consider that. We'll talk about that, but also just take a little bit more of a kind of a practical, a prudent, a more positive spin on it and frame it as a lifestyle, right? So we're going to talk about, why build your pantry and what can be included. How is going to be different for everybody, right? Every single one of us has different circumstances, including, the homes that we live in, the space that we have, funds, a budget to be able to do this. And, resources locally as well. So, really that's where the customization comes in. So I'm not necessarily going to cover, go exactly here and buy exactly this. Because that really is personal. That's a customization. And like I mentioned, we're all going to have different resources and abilities to take on different things. So the goal here today is, wherever you're at, if this is completely brand new to you and you're just starting, awesome, wonderful, welcome. And if you're already just a few steps down the path and you're maybe just looking for a few more ideas, just kind of maybe fill in the picture, fill in some of the blanks that you maybe you have or didn't know you have, then that is perfect too. So as I started mentioning, there's any number of reasons why I think we should do this, including, the kind of the doom and gloom, right? The end of the world, which, may or may not be coming. I'm not here to say it is. I'm not here to say it isn't. But like I said, what is unfolded in the last 2 years, I'm sure none of us ever would have guessed that could even be possible. And yet here we are. And fortunately, we've all made it through. It hasn't been the end of the world, but there's probably been some wake up calls just to kind of, inspiration, like, what? I should just be a little bit more prepared, like to see what happened in BC, to see what happened in Texas, to see what happened in, you name it, anything, anytime, anywhere can happen. So there is that kind of, that practicality of preparedness, but there's so much more to it. And we've gotten comfortable, I love the society we live in, for all its kind of benefits. There's a lot of downfalls as well. And we've really come to rely on this industrial supply chain that has this, just in time, right? Everything is just right there at our fingertips, available. That's amazing. That's wonderful. What an incredible blessing. And yet, I feel it's not prudent to not prepare otherwise, because it is fragile, and we've seen how fragile it can be. So any number of reasons that kind of just-in-time supply chain could cease. We've seen a couple, right, in the last little while. It's a flood in your part of the country, another part of the country, knocks out the rail lines, knocks out the road lines. A pandemic, and everyone's forced, indoors, and there's a rush, to get toilet paper and any number of other ingredients or things that people, feel they need. There was definitely shortages. There is the potential of, cyber attacks, right? I mean, and these aren't my words or potentials. I mean, this is some of the, the biggest voices on the global platform, like Klaus Schwab, saying that, a cyber attack would make the whole COVID pandemic look like child's play. I mean, his words, not mine. That's a potential. Who knows, right? Even Bill Gates says, pandemic 2 will get your attention. I'm not sure what he meant by that, but who knows, right? So this is the idea of, we're just going to be prudently plan, prepare. And I'd like to put in perspective that, this is a much more nourishing, wholesome way of living, that, it's inherently human, that we do this. We have this type of mindset. We're much more like squirrels in that regard in our humanity. And our ancestors, we would not be here today if we did not have that hardwired into us. And it's literally only been the last generation, the last several decades, that we've put it out of our mind, right? We've just been able to rely on this incredible, amazing global supply chain. Like I say, we have access to literally anything, 365, 24/7 until we don't, right? So it's about being reasonable. It's about looking at the probabilities of an event or a situation you could be in. Like we mentioned, cyber attacks, natural disasters, pandemics, that type of thing, or even like what happens if you lose your job. I know quite a number of people that because of these mandates have lost their job. They're not going along with the narrative. They're choosing another path, and that has meant they're out of a job. Right. And so that could be part of it too, where if you've kind of planned, prepared, you got a food, when we're specifically talking about, a pantry, a food store, there's so many other things to this lifestyle one can include. But if you had, let's say, 2 weeks of food, 3 weeks of food, a month, 3 months, I know people that have 6 months, a year's worth of food, that's empowering, right? You lose your job, like you don't have to think about like, oh, what am I going to do? How am I going to feed my family? How am I going to eat, for the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 months, a year. So we'll lay out different kinds of scenarios, and you are going to come up with your own goals, right? Based upon cyber attack, probabilities. I'm not going to plan for that one. Very small, right? Just decide what your own kind of risk factor is and how to plan accordingly. And, I've got lots of great examples myself that, when the whole pandemic started, my wife and I, again, this is kind of a lifestyle, a strategy that we live. And, it was just in the beginning, right? Where you just kind of hear these rumors like, oh, what's going on? Like, this is kind of weird, right? It was just one thing after another. And then it just snowballed and it was like total shutdown. But literally, 3 weeks before, my wife's intuition kicked in a little bit more. She's like, you know what, like I know we're pretty good. Like, we've kind of got some supplies but I feel like we should need to boost this up. Right. So we made a big order of just more things. And, in that panic, I don't know if you remember, you see those like lineups all around, like the back of Costco, not that we shop there, but there was other stores just exactly the same way. And we didn't need to be a part of it. We weren't the ones standing in line. We didn't need to panic. We're like, yeah, we're all good. Right. So there's kind of a practicality and a positivity to that as well. We can remain in that calmness. You've prepared as much as you could have, right? And you can sit back and relax, and you don't have to be a part of that panic that ensues in society. And I know there's a lot of negativity spun around this type of path, right? Like, oh, you're a hoarder, you're, like they're trying to, it's like, really? No, this is just something so human. And it's actually a positive benefit to you and to society to prepare, to plan accordingly. So, don't be that one standing in the line. You're doing your community and your society a service by being prepared. Right? When you're not the one panicking, you're not the one in need of aid. If anything does happen, you're good. You've done what you could have, right? And it's also just more nourishing, right? It's a lifestyle. It's about kind of going back to more of our roots as humans, and what our ancestors did that allowed us to show up here. I hope supply chains remain open and that type of thing, but you never know. I mean, I was just watching a video earlier today about this guy. There was an MIT study where they say, they think human society, civilization, Western civilization, we know it, is going to collapse by 2040. And here's all the reasons why, right? I've got friends that literally, they used to live in Edmonton, they sold everything, they moved to BC, and they have literally prepared for the end of the world, as there's this kind of environmental decline and this kind of societal collapse. That's one perspective, and in them, with their viewpoint of the world and perspective, that's the path they're taking. that may not be yours. Another example is, just this last week, a cold kind of circulating through my house. Came in with the kids, then I got it, Laura got it, and we didn't have to go anywhere, right? We're like, we've got all our food, all our medicine right here. We don't need to leave the house. We're good, we're prepared. So even just kind of simple things like that, there's so much benefit to this. So it's not hoarding, it's human nature, just to kind of finish off that point there. And then a long-term perspective, right? It's a practice. It's going to take time to get good at this, and you're going to create a lifestyle around this that's nourishing. So think about your timeline, the goals you want to achieve as we go through all this. And yeah, don't get overwhelmed, right? Pick what works for you in your circumstances. And I'm going to guess, obviously, I'm sure everybody has enough for a day. You got enough food, medicine, that type of thing, water for the day, maybe for the week, right? Could you manage a week? So let's begin to kind of extend that timeline, 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, a whole year. I can tell you I'm not that far. I don't have a year's supply of everything. There's certain things that I've picked and chose that I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I've got that supply. And, I also want to propose and think beyond just like, a store of, I've got enough crackers for a year. But, how can we also rely less on supply chains and be able to go out and acquire or create the things that we need and want. And, many of us were already on that path, right? There's many things that we're already, making at home instead of relying on buying it. And so this is just part of that movement of kind of relocalizing our food supply and the food chain. So sessions to get you started, move you further down the path. And again, it's not a complete step-by solution for anyone. This is about you customizing it. Now, probably maybe the number one difference that I'll be sharing tonight between other advice that I've heard, right? I've been at, different meetings and sessions, and, the advice is, okay, you got to get a food store. Here's a company in the States that'll, send you a box full of prepackaged, basically space food, like just add water and you're good. It's enough calories, 2,300 calories per person per day for 30 days, and you order your supply. I own none of that. For me, again, this is a lifestyle, and I want to build up a store, a pantry of things that I use every day. So it's not like I've got my emergency, space food in a bunker that if shit hits the fan, I just go down and tear open the Mylar bag, add hot water and start to eat. And that's my food for the next month. No, these are foods that I eat every day, and it's a store, it's a cellar, it's a pantry, and just been building that up. All right. Okay, so first, number one, obviously, would be water. So that's having a kind of a store of water, jugs. Now that can be in, less practical things like, 1 gallon jugs. This is meat. I'll talk about that later on. But I've got, 5 gallon, 6 gallon jugs of water. Some of them are plastic jugs. Some of them are glass jugs, and they're always full. So I've got about 5 or 6 of those. So not a huge amount, but it's something. I've also, outside of the winter months, I've also got rain barrels. I've got a capacity of about 4,500 liters to catch rainwater. And I use that, year round for watering the garden, feeding my hydroponic system, that kind of stuff. And if need be, it's, as a backup. I think of all the possible scenarios, it's a fairly unlikely one, but hey, who knows, right? And so within that, having stored water, I've also got a gravity fed, like portable filtration system. So we've got a whole water filtration system on the house. So as soon as the water comes in, it goes through this large tank, filters it all. And then actually on the other side of that, I've got a copper pipe that's got a vortex spirals in it. And so it vortexes, re-energizes, restructures the water. And then that goes throughout the rest of the house. So everything we bathe in, everything we drink, everything we water the garden with, if we're not using harvested rainwater, then everything is filtered and energized in that way. But again, that's relying on the grid and, making sure the water's flowing from the city. But just in that kind of, potential backup, I do have jugs of water stored as well. So think about that for yourself. Is that something kind of reasonable, practical? Berkey are the water filtration systems. They can just sit on your counter. You can get different sizes. Great one, just for even everyday use, just for your drinking water. Berkey will even filter out fluoride. If you're going to buy a Berkey, then look into, they do recommend getting extra, carbon filters, because it's really hard on the filters to take out the fluoride. So that is an option. Yeah, so Jody asked what filter. So I've got one on the house, is called Northern Water Cleaners. And that one currently, so Calgary is introducing fluoride back into its water. It's probably going to take 18 months to 2 years until it's in. So we don't need to worry about it yet. But that one will take out about 3/4 of the fluoride. And then there's an attachment that you put on that you need to change every year that will take almost all the rest of it out, over 90%. So that's Northern Water Cleaners for the whole house system. You can rent them, you can buy them. And then the other kind of more portable one is the Berkey water filter system. So maybe you're in a condo, right? And though Northern Water Cleaners does have systems for that, but it's a little bit less expensive just to get one that sits on your counter. And then we've also got, from camping and that type of thing, these types of hand pumps. But we're not going to go too far into this. I'm not talking about like go bags and that type of thing. This is just for your everyday living, building up your pantry and having those supplies. So when it comes to food, in no particular order, meat, right? And I personally, like to buy in bulk. A lot of what we're going to be talking about is doing that, right? So one of the other benefits in kind of this element of prosperity is, oh yeah, Nick says water from the spring from Canmore. Absolutely. So, thinking about, and this is a big part of the conversation, is what can you source from off and outside the grid in your local neighborhood. So in Canmore, in Banff, incredible spring water. And in Calgary, there are a lot of springs. I live in a neighborhood called Silver Springs. There's actually springs here. Now, I wouldn't personally choose it for my everyday drinking water. But hey, in a kind of a worst case scenario, I know where those are. I could fill up jugs and then I could put them through a filter if I needed. So yeah, figure that out. Okay, so on food, meat, buying in bulk, right? If you can do it, quarter cow, half cow, full cow. I mean, I don't have the freezer space for a full cow, but we've definitely bought, full lambs. We've bought, half pigs and half cows. And there are many farmers that will sell you that. And there are a lot of buying groups and co-ops that you can get together, and you can have 3 months, 6 months worth of meat stored up in a freezer. Now, freezer, depending on where you live, and if you've got a large freezer or even an extra freezer, and a lot of people have deep freezes in their basements or in their garages, could be extremely valuable. Other way, of course, is getting that meat and then processing it yourself, right? So it comes in frozen, or maybe you've hunted, right? And you've gotten yourself some meat. You can dry it, in the case of things like jerky, or you can salt cure it in the case of things like prosciutto, right? If you're going to buy chickens or you buy ducks or rabbit or anything like that, salt curing and doing these types of prosciuttos is one way. And then, of course, canning. I personally haven't done a lot of canning of meat, but when the freezer space runs out, then it's a very practical way to store that food. And then, again, thinking about how to kind of source these things yourself outside of supply chains, going direct to local farmers, but also, is it hunting, right? Or is it raising the animals yourself? Rabbits, I think, are probably one of the most efficient, productive meat foods one could raise. And again, this gets into a little bit into lifestyle. I personally don't raise any kind of meat animals in the city, but one could. And I know obviously a lot of friends that do this outside of the city. Grains, this is a big one, right? The idea of, rice, oats, teff, quinoa, anything like that. Very easy to store. And if you can get, a 25-pound bag or a 50-pound bag, each of these categories, just think of how less you have to go to the grocery store. I don't know about you, but, I don't love, unfortunately, I don't love going out anymore. I don't love going to the store, like I put on my mask, or like just seeing other people with masks. Like, just me personally, I'm just like, I don't, I try and look beyond it, but honestly, it's not my favorite thing anymore. No, that was my favorite thing, but you know what I mean? So, if I can get all the oats I need for 6 months, and I've got all the, it's just less trips to the grocery store. So there's a huge amount of benefit that way. We're going to talk about some kind of equipment and storage. These types of containers are very good. So, you can find these buckets. This had miso in it. So, talk to a health food store. You can also buy them brand new as well. So, these kind of 5-gallon pails, and then these lids, and you can just use the lid as is, but, like they get kind of cumbersome to like lift off and open up. So this is called a gamma lid, and it just fits right on, and it screws. Just tighten that right up, and there you go, right? So you can have a nice store of, like, that fits 25-pound bag of basmati rice or whatever it is, right? It would take a couple of bins to do 50 pounds of oats, in which case maybe it's a giant like Tupperware container, right? Just fill that up, and anytime then, so that's what we have, 50-pound bag of oats in the basement. Can be fairly inexpensive, grains when you're buying in bulk. And by the way, I can talk a little bit about, ideas for if you're on a budget or if you have less space. We'll kind of get into some of those considerations. So everything that I mentioned here, again, I know for your particular circumstance, it might feel overwhelming. Hey, I don't have the budget, I don't have the space. Each of us is in a different circumstance. So I'll just talk about kind of my experience and what, works for me, and maybe hopefully works for you. So, big giant tote of oats, and, we also have rice, we have teff, we got some quinoa. Another thing, which I never would have thought of, but a friend of mine, he used to live in Calgary. He's now moved to the East Coast, and, major prepper, in that regard, and huge, almost like to the point of like pack rat, like, type of hoarder is like, that might actually be, on the borderline of hoarding, but whatever, that was just him and his style. And when he was moving, I got so many things from him. And this is part of that prosperity, that abundance, because, he knew this was a life that I was into. I feel like I attracted him into my life. And when he was moving, he's like, what am I going to do with my giant thing of barley? What am I going to do with my giant thing of honey? What am I going to do with this? He gave it to me. He gave me, unbelievable. It was incredible windfall. I got, how much was it? 250 liters of apple cider, 250 pounds of honey, and then this giant, and that stuff will last forever. It literally will last forever. I gifted a whole bunch, and he also gave me whole barley, right? So the whole barley seed. So it hadn't been flaked, it hadn't been floured, none of that. So I recommend getting whole grain in that sense, although white rice will store longer than brown rice. But this whole barley is, not something I actually really eat or use. So it is there just as a total, like, I'll eventually use it. I thought, well, maybe if I get chickens, I can use it as feed for them, or something. But maybe I'll start making bread with it, right? So the whole grain, I can grind it. And this gets into equipment. You think about, okay, if I got the whole grains, do I have something to be able to grind it fresh? Nothing better than fresh grains, right? Ground grains. But the other thing I can do with it actually is I can turn it into sprouts. So I can actually grow barley grass, right? Just like wheatgrass. And that's an incredible source of fresh nutrients, right? Because about everything that we're going to be talking about here isn't necessarily fresh, right? Or have that fresh like quality. There's a couple things, but when it comes to sprouting, that's amazing, right? And seeds store very easily, very well. And so I haven't even weighed it. I have no idea how much this thing weighs, but it's a giant barrel of this barley grain. And that's what he did with it, right? Like he had it, that was his store, an entire year worth of barley kernels that he would sprout into a barley grass and then juice it. And, just incredible source of chlorophyll, fresh nutrients. That was just a part of, again, his everyday. So instead of every week he's buying another bag of barley, he just, again, he had the cash, he was able to do it, buy it all up front, straight from the farmer. And the same with the honey. I don't know how much he spent on that honey. I gave him a couple $100 for it, but this massive barrel of honey. And admittedly, he'd kind of worked his way down, but he went direct to a beekeeper and got this incredibly large amount of honey. Circumstances changed. He ends up moving, and I was the lucky beneficiary of that, because that's good. I like honey. All right. So moving on, kind of the next categories. We talked about meat. We talked about grains, salt. I would say that this one is actually very easy for any and all of us to get a 1-year supply, no problem. A high quality, but also cost-effective source of salt. Even something like Himalayan salt. There are much more fancier salts. Maybe you have a selection, pantry of different types of salts. But salt is just one of those key essential ones. Why wouldn't you? And it's very accessible when it comes to cost. So it can provide you enough, obviously, for all your own food, for your salt, water that some of you drinking tonight, but then also for preservation, right? We talked about salt curing meats or salt curing vegetables, or, doing fermentation. I didn't bring up a jar of ferments, right? But I mean, I've got tons and tons of lacto-fermented vegetables that are all require a decent amount of salt. And yeah, I won't need to buy salt for the next year, at least, easy. And it's quite obviously condensed, right? It was like a 1 gallon pail of salt. Sweeteners, we talked a little bit about that. Yeah. Gene is saying, and honey never goes bad. Absolutely. So, that's something that one could easily store up. And, maybe I'll just mention it now, versus kind of at the end. So one strategy that you could have here is, every time you go to the store, you pick up, one extra, right? You get your regular groceries, but you pick up one extra, right? Well, I'm going to buy a tub of honey. Maybe I'll just get the slightly larger one, or I'll buy 2 tubs, that type of thing. So, work that into your lifestyle as you slowly build up a stock of food. But yes, honey will last forever. So will cane sugar, right? Cane sugar is not something I use every single day, but or much at all. But it was one of those ones that's like super cheap, organic, high quality, like cane sugar. Got a nice big bag of it, and we use it every once in a while. But it's kind of one of those, like, in a worst case scenario, here's what I can do with it. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Maple syrup can often be get in drums or in cans or in bottles. One thing about maple syrup is that once you do open it, then you got to refrigerate it. It will have a shelf life. But if it's canned, or if it's sealed up in individual jars, then that will store and last long time. And then of course you can get maple sugar as well, where it's been dried out. So Sweeteners, you choose. Spices, I think this is a really critical one. I don't think any of us could really imagine life without spice, certainly not black pepper. So, again, it's one of those things. It's like you're out shopping, you're stocking the pantry. Why not get an extra bag, right? Or if you're buying bulk wholesale, you've got a supplier, you're going through the catalog. Why don't I get a pound of curry spice, a pound of, garam masala? You don't need to get every single spice in your cupboard, because sometimes things like clove, it will last you a year. Just simply buying a jar, that's all you need. But maybe some of those things that you really love, you use on a regular basis, you couldn't imagine life without. I would do a curry powder, I would do a chai blend, right? In terms of spices, getting individual ones and getting blends. And then as we talk about lifestyle, this is something that's very easy to be able to grow yourself, whether you're in a condo, right? Just to have, a tray of fresh herbs, growing on the counter, or you've got a garden during the summer and you can grow those herbs and then preserve them, right? Maybe you preserve all your rosemary, can't necessarily grow that too well in Calgary, but if you're on the coast or you're on some other climate where, that's quite favorable, have that growing, like Vancouver grows year round, right? Victoria, awesome. Vegetables, right? So moving on, sweeteners, spicers, vegetables, freeze dried is good. Freeze drying is definitely one of the most effective ways. And I have to admit, I prefer freeze dried fruits more than I do vegetables, but that is an option. Canned vegetables, again, not a big thing that I do or use a lot, but something that one can do that is can. Fermentation, that's probably, apart from, well, that's probably actually the number one way that I kind of preserve vegetables for the long term, and our ancestors did as well, is through fermentation. So any number of different ways. I teach a bunch of courses. I know many of you guys have taken fermentation classes with me, or you've attended the fermentation festival. I think this is one of our kind of greatest allies for kind of storing vegetables long term, and getting fresh like nutrients in the middle of winter, right? To get vitamin C, to get all these B vitamins, that type of thing that we normally associate with having fresh produce available every week. Fermentation allows us access to that. So definitely, again, this is where it becomes a lifestyle, where you begin to reskill yourself. So if you're already fermenting, this is you already down that path, right? And building that up. So drying, right? Yeah, Jean is saying that she dehydrates, and we got a couple of folks saying tower gardens, right? Growing their fresh produce throughout the winter in the condo, in the house. I personally haven't experimented with a tower garden, but they sound great. I'm curious, does the tower garden, does these things require power, or are they just kind of self-operating without power? So one other way that we've gone to storing vegetables ourselves this year, we tried a little bit last year, but this year we went right in full on, which is kind of, the root cellar. And, again, I understand not everyone may have this opportunity, but, most houses in Calgary do have basements. And in the last, 10 years, maybe 12 years, maybe a little bit longer, but anyways, the house I'm in now, as well as the one that I used to live in when I first started Light Cellar, out of my basement, and everything we're talking about is kind of the origin of where that name came from, right? I've always had this inclination to buy in bulk and create this pantry, create this cellar, and Light Cellar was just like, it's full of light, it's a beautiful thing, it's not dark, it's dingy, it's this beautiful, abundant, prosperous thing where you've reinvigorated the idea, the concept of the cellar. And so it was in Montgomery, northwest of Calgary. I had a home there where we lived upstairs, and then downstairs, it was almost like its own separate suite. It had a bathroom, it had another kitchen, and it had this room that we turned into, a teaching area. And then it had a couple of rooms. One of them we turned into the colonic space. So my wife, Laura, in those early days, she used to do colonics as I was kind of doing the bulk foods and the classes and the making chocolate. So we used to joke it was like a feed 'em and clean 'em kind of business. And so she had the colonic set up, but in one of those rooms in the basement, there was actually a cold room. Right. So whoever was there, and I know those are kind of few and far between now, but some of the houses still have cold rooms. Someone was prudent enough, in that basement to take a room. And this was more like a closet in that particular house. But the one I'm in now, I mean, maybe a square footage, the way that it's set up, it's almost the size of a small bedroom that's in the basement that is undeveloped, that we have turned into like a more proper cold room. It's not 100% perfect, but we're getting there. We worked on that this year. That's what we want. We're going to turn it into like a full-on, like proper, like cellar. So storing vegetables, things like potatoes, right? They're in the dark and they're cool. So we bought, from Lund's, we bought giant bag of potatoes, giant bag of carrots, giant bag of beets, giant bag of parsnips, and I haven't done the math of how many, weeks, months will this last us, but I mean, hey, we don't have to go shop for those staples for a long time. And so, yeah, if something happened, grid down or something happened, like, great, we got that food, we got that storage, but, on just kind of a practical level, it freezes up from like, oh, right, do we have potatoes? Should I put that on the grocery list? Do I have to go it again? It's like, no, just go down to the basement. There it is. And when you buy in bulk any of these things, you can often get a better deal, right? So if you can put up the cash up front, and again, it doesn't have to be 50 pounds, but maybe at 5 pounds, there's a discount. Maybe at 25 pounds, there's a discount. So whatever you can fit into your budget, you're saving a little bit. And what we've seen, and I think it could likely get worse, is this idea of inflation, right? With all the events of the last 2 years, how we've responded is not the pandemic, it is how we've responded to the pandemic, right? We're shutting society down. That has caused, and the money printing, most especially. So it's supply chain disruptions, right? And it's the money printing that has caused the inflation. And it's huge, right? They say, oh, it's only like, 4%. No, it's not, right? And it depends on what area of society are we looking at? What area of the economy are we looking at? Everything has its own different inflation rate, right? Beef is inflating different than chicken, is inflating different than potatoes, on and on and on. And, as the weather gets more erratic, right? If that's really going to be a thing, and that's what we're seeing. There was a lot of crop failure in certain places. And I don't know if anybody follows the Ice Age Farmer. He's got a YouTube channel and, Telegram channel. I mean, he's a little bit like doomsday, but it's worth just keeping in the back of your mind. He talks about the wheat stocks and the corn stocks and the soy stocks and how globally they're just going down and down and down. And this is another thing that we've become disconnected from, lost sight of, is that as societies, as communities, civilizations, countries, we prided ourselves. It was a goal. We're building up, 6 months worth of food, right? Or a year and a half worth of food. Like, societies worked on that, communities worked on that. And that was something of pride, because it was essential, right, to have that store of food to make it through the winter. And, no doubt we've been blessed with the supply chain that we have for the last number of years. But I think it's a little bit foolish to rely on it too much, right? Just like anybody else, I hope that it stays and remains. But yet at the same time, I think, the more we can kind of just shift our lifestyle, right? So even if you're not going to be jumping all into this, 110% tomorrow, moving in this direction to becoming a little bit more self-sufficient, less reliant on these supply chains that have this fragility. May they last forever, but how reasonable is that? And how fragile are they? And what are the potentials? So, we're talking about vegetables, right? There's that convenience. I can just go downstairs and, potatoes, right? So we've got them still in their bag. We just got them wrapped up like, in a bin with the towel over it in the dark. That's kind of the main thing. Carrots, beets, parsnips, these other root vegetables, we stored them in sand. So bought a bunch of sand from the hardware store, got these Tupperware bins, and basically layer of sand, you place the vegetables in, and so that they're not touching. Another layer of sand, layer of vegetables, sand, and then you make sure it's moist. And that apparently, this will be our first year trying it, preserves them. And we're several weeks in, and so far so good, right? And I know, having talked to some of these farmers, that things like cabbage, normally we're good, right? Like working with Lunds, I only buy local cabbage for Light Cellar for producing these ferments. And they told me straight up, like, normally they produce so much and they're able to store enough that no problem. By like March, April, I'm checking in. I'm like, how much cabbage do you have left? Right? Can I still get some of that? Can I still get parsnips? What about your carrots? What about, this, that, cabbage? They're like, we have what we have. And, buy it now. So I actually bought an extra giant vat. They do 250 liters. We have another one that's 300. That's our largest. These are winemaking vats, and that's on a commercial scale, obviously. But individually, maybe we're doing a gallon, or maybe we're doing, a 15-liter pot of vegetables, right? The peak of the season, when these veggies are at their, the height of nutrition, just picked fresh. Yeah, we can cold store them, right? Or we can rely on Lunds to cold store it, or, Safeway to hold it for us. But there's an advantage to, getting it right in the peak, the middle of summer. It's cheaper, right? I did a ton of fermentation, visited the Saskatoon farm just south of Calgary. They had an abundant year. They had their own, a lot of farmers struggled. One of the things that Lunds is why they're like, get what you can for cabbage now. Because we had a really rough year. Well, Saskatoon farm, they live on a place where two rivers meet. They were irrigating their crops. Like, it was their first year doing it, just like abundant, right? And I mean, I know the owners, I know Austin, all those good folks, and they practically like giving it to me. So this abundance of fresh produce didn't hardly cost anything, and we can ferment it to preserve it. And I'll be eating that come into middle of January. And just a note on veggies, because, let's say, 15-liter crock, or a 1 gallon jar, or a 1 liter jar that you ferment. My friend Terry Willard, his wife is an incredible gardener. And I remember him and I were doing a fermentation course a couple of years ago. And, he was lamenting, just like, like one more thing to ferment. And he would ferment it like in his pots. And then, as soon as he could that was done, he'd pull it out, jar it. And then to put the next crop that was coming in off his garden. And he ran into this issue where, he already had a fermentation fridge, he called it, right? So he's all his pickles, all his ferments, like he just loaded up this fridge, but he still had crops and he still had veggies coming through. So he then moved to canning, right? And so when you can your fermented vegetables, you're not going to get the living bacteria, right? The probiotics, but you're still going to get so many benefits to that. So it's still incredibly valuable to have. It's calories. It's also, the acidity, the lactic acid, which is good for the digestion, good for your guts. I mean, there's so many benefits to it. And, it allows to kind of, you're not just reliant on, loading up a fridge. How many fridges can you have, and how many jars can you have in there? So there's a practical way to, ferment can if you need. All right. Amy's just asking if I can send the recording. I totally will. So the recording is going to go out tomorrow. Absolutely. All right. So that was storing veg. Next, I guess maybe related back to, we're talking about animals, the bones and making broth. Incredibly valuable, and similar kind of issue with space, right? It's like, generally what we've done is we've had enough space where, okay, we bought the half cow or the pig or whatever it is, and the meat can go in, the bones can go in, the organs can go in, and we just slowly pull away from that. And we had this kind of pileup of not only bones, but also fat. And so we had this kind of blitz of making all this broth. And so we're making bone broths and meat stocks. And, typically what we'll do, like I say, is every few weeks, we'll make a month worth of broth, right? Big giant pot. I'm sure you guys are all the same. Is you make your broth and then you pour it into jars and then you freeze it. But at this point, since we were trying to make our way through the bones to clear room into the freezer for the next animal coming in, we kind of got behind on that, and we did way, 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 way more than we could possibly store. So in the freezer anyways. And so what we did is we reduced it down. Right, so evaporated off as much moisture as possible, so it was more like a concentrate. This is not a new thing by any means. So you can either just reduce it down into a kind of a super concentrated liquid, freeze that, and then you've got that concentrate. Or what we also did is, really, really reduced it down, added a bunch of gelatin, stirred that in, and then we made these little like jellies, these like bouillon cubes, super concentrated. And then, literally what would have been probably, 36, or I don't know, not even sure what the count would have been, but way more than our freezer could have accommodated, broth, reduced right down into like just one Ziploc bag of these bouillon cubes. And we chose to freeze them. I'm sure there's a way, and I'll learn, eventually on, how to do that kind of like dried step. But, super concentrated broth, and then just froze it. And then so now anytime we need that broth, either for a soup or even like cooking stir fries, you want to add that in, you just drop it in, and just instant flavor, nutrition, everything. And of course, one could can them as well. Soups, sauces, stocks, you can make all those and then can them, and then you just have them in the pantry ready to go. The fat, what we ended up doing, it was from a pig we got a little while ago, and it was all like, the lard, it was the back fat, and then we just rendered it into lard. Praise the lard. Fats and oils, very key, right? When part of our diet, our lifestyle, and so kind of building up a store of that. This is one of those things where we know, nutritionally in the early spring, through the spring into the early summer is the most nutritious fats that we can get from things like butter. So ghee is, at the shop, we brought in this ghee that was literally just glowing yellow, right? Just, I knew it, just like the time of year is like, wow, something is like incredible with this ghee. So I picked up a couple extra jars, stuck them in the freezer, and, now I'm working through that as the season progresses, knowing that, we've got that butter optimal amount, fresh, the peak of the season, and able to store that. We'll also buy, butter in cases instead of just kind of by the block. Olive oil, buy big tins of it, or drums, bottles, again, extra ones. Maybe that's one where it's like, I'm gonna buy some olive oil. Maybe I'll get a second jar, right? Just one for the pantry type of thing. So think about the types of fats and oils that you use and how you can build up a supply of that. Mushrooms, dried, and this is kind of, now we can get into the idea, I mean, in any and all of these things, but mushrooms, I'm a mushroom hunter. I love mushroom foraging, and so I've got jars of mushrooms that I've picked through the season. I've also got jars of mushrooms that a friend of mine grew. So these are lion's mane mushrooms that were grown by a friend in northern Alberta, dried, and I've got them in a jar. And, personally, that's a pretty good supply of lion's mane mushroom. You can do shiitakes, right? Very easy to kind of find and buy dried mushrooms, last forever, and are a real treat, very nutritious, and also medicinal. So reishi mushroom, turkey tail, these types of things, not only food, but also medicine, and things that you can put into your broths, your stocks, that type of thing. Nuts and seeds. Yeah, we talked a little bit about, grains and, in the grain section, talking about getting seeds for sprouting, also seeds for eating, right? Sunflower, sesame, very inexpensive comparative to, I'm sure there's not many people that are going to go out and get a 50-pound box of macadamias. But hey, if that's your thing, go for it. But, for us, we got some sesame, we got some sunflower, we got coconut flakes, these types of things, either in, like a 5-pound bag or a 1-gallon bucket. Obviously, one could go more if this is a really big part of your diet, but easy, in stores well, especially in a cold room, and great addition to whatever it is. Your oatmeal, making granolas, topping stir fries, you name it. Fruits, fresh fruits, pretty obvious, peak of the season, if you can dry them. Of course, we can freeze them, we can can them, and all kinds of fruits, including, raisins, apricot, figs, you name it. Then, yeah, okay, so Jean's mentioning about, boiling down, right? Making jams, making jellies, making syrups. These are a great way to kind of concentrate and store fruits, to get those antioxidant pigments, to get, the nutrients that fruits provide. And part of this is, again, reskilling our lifestyle to, wild forage, fruits. There's fruits in Calgary on the bush that you can pick year round, right? It can be March, and I can show you bushes where you can go and get fruit. I can't say it's fresh fruit, but it's there, it's frozen. Things like rose hips, things like buffalo berries, things like Saskatoons. They'll often even, you have to check them. There's lots of delicious dried ones you can eat year round. The buffalo berries, sea buckthorn. Yeah, so wild harvesting, again, peak of the season, collecting and then processing to store and however you want. Yeah, canning, jams, all that stuff. Cheese. This is something that I forgot to bring the little machine up to show you, but again, savings in the sense of buying cheese. Ideally, one makes their own cheese, but we buy it, and we bought like a big giant brick of cheddar, and we bought a big half wheel of Gouda, and so again, you get a discount. You don't have to go to the store as often. And one of the best ways we found to kind of preserve that is to vacuum seal it. And a vacuum sealer was not on my radar, but last year a friend of mine, his business unfortunately didn't make it through the restrictions and all the lockdowns and all that stuff. So he had to kind of liquidate everything, and he had one of these vacuum sealers. I think you buy them at like Canadian Tire and whatever, but man, like that works. It's great, especially for things like cheese. It still needs to be kept cool, but removing that oxygen will allow that cheese to last a long, long time. So, we got this half wheel of Gouda, chop it up, whoosh, sealed it up, and it worked amazing. Okay, yeah, Claudette's saying she likes to shred her cheese, then put it into freezer bags. Totally. So freezer, way to do it. Awesome. Eggs. Now, personally, like I've always got at least, a week extra of eggs on the counter. We get unwashed, like farm fresh eggs from a couple of different sources. And, I've always got 1 week ahead. So in addition to my regular order, there's that one kind of sitting waiting at home. There's a new thing that we're going to try this year. And it is getting, and Laura researched this online, we bought what we need to do it, but we just haven't done it yet. So this is the idea of getting hydrated lime, and it's a powder. We bought it from Home Hardware or something like that. It was only a place in Cochrane where we could get it. And basically you hydrate this lime, and then you put the eggs in. And from the video that she watched, like these people pulled it out, and like you can cook with it, you can eat it, like just it preserves it beautifully. So we're going to experiment with that, and that's probably something that we're going to get into in a big way. Again, peak of the season, the middle of summer, when the chickens are like actually free range. They're outside, they're eating, bugs. Those yolks are they just don't compare, right? In July and August, they don't compare to what you get in January. I'm grateful for fresh eggs in January, but like they're not the same, and there's some kind of unnatural circumstances we need to create for the chickens so they keep laying and producing. But the video that Laura was watching of these folks up in Alaska, they're trying to be totally self-sufficient, so they raise chickens during the summer, they butcher them in the fall, eat them, but then the eggs they had stored up, and so they put it in this like hydrated lime, and they had eggs year round doing that. So that's new, something that we're going to try. We'll just experiment with a dozen, try it out for about a month or so, pull some out, see how it goes. And that's something that will likely continue on and just become part of our repertoire. So Jean says water glassing is great, just don't use store-bought eggs. Awesome. Tatiana says you can dehydrate eggs and they can last a year if vacuum sealed and not opened. Absolutely. Yeah. So you can also pickle eggs, right? So when you do a ferment, you pickle cucumbers, or you pickle beans, or you pickle garlic, or anything like that, and all that brine, or even the brine left over from a sauerkraut, hard boil the eggs, peel them, and then stick them into the brine. Or hard boil them, peel them, stick them into miso, and just bury it in the miso. That's another way to kind of preserve and have a long lasting. Claudette asks, what is water glassing? I have to admit, I don't know what water glassing is. So maybe, and Jean can let us know water glassing. I've heard the term, but I've never done it. All right. Here's this one. Next one you might want or may not want, and that is the idea of alcohol, right? So having some booze on hand for any number of reasons, right? Barterability. In a grid down situation, people will get desperate. They're going to be looking for alcohol. A lot of people can't go without it. So it could just be purely for a barterability. It could just be that you enjoy a bit of and a drink. It's a great way to kind of relax, ease some tension, celebrate, whatever the case is, and no better than making your own. So I make my own. I buy it every once in a while too, but this is a mead, so a honey wine. So that, we talked about having a store of sugar or honey. Part of what I'm thinking to do with the sugar that I bought, the 50-pound sack, which was very inexpensive, and I use a little bit of sugar every once in a while. But part of my kind of plan is, if ever in a grid down situation, that sugar becomes a barter in that regard. But I can also then turn it into alcohol for using it for anything else, right? And yeah, exactly what Robin is just saying, extra vodka, right? For tinctures. So it can be vodka, or it can be like a super high proof. This one's spiritus. It's 96% alcohol. So you can use this like in a real first aid kind of medicine way. And of course, maybe you want to consider even having like rubbing alcohol, that kind of stuff. But so I do a lot of my own kind of natural alcohols that are like beer, cider, meads, wines, anywhere in the kind of range of 4% to 15%, 14%. My next project that I want to get into is I want to learn how to distill. It's highly illegal. So, don't say anything there. But just for my own, experimentation, and primarily to make my own tinctures, right? So as Robin had mentioned in the chat there, buying, vodka, these kinds of things, you can make your own tinctures. So remember that lion's mane that I showed you? One of those jars, right? I turn it into a tincture. So I've got, lion's mane tincture. I've got balm of Gilead tincture. I have valerian tincture. I got a whole apothecary of my own tinctures that I make, from foods and herbs and medicines that I've gathered from the wild, as well as that I've grown myself. And, alcohol is a great preservative. So these tinctures, that will literally last forever. I made this in November, but I have no rush to get to that. Like that's a good supply, right? And the great thing about this spiritus, if you can find it, there are other types and brands. Like there's Everclear, but that is made from GMO corn. And if that's all you have access to, like it's not the worst in the world. But I like to not support the idea of that in that industry. But it's one of the other high proof alcohols, which this one runs anywhere from $40 to $50 for a 750 ml bottle. Vodka, 750 ml bottle. Anywhere, I mean, on the cheaper end, you can maybe get it 25 or 30, but a good quality one might be $40 or $50. So this one gives you, being 96%, gives you, almost 2.5 times, the volume of alcohol that you can dilute, right? So when I made this tincture, this isn't just 96% alcohol. This is actually 25% spiritus with 75% water or tea, if you want to get into like what's called dual extracts. And we don't have time to go into that. There's a whole art to kind of tincture making. But the point here is this is, this is part of the path. This is part of developing that lifestyle of, learning how to craft your own food and medicine. It's my mission is to help you do that. We got lots of courses online where, you can learn how to make your own tinctures efficiently. So spiritus, again, I don't want to get too into like specific, like, yeah, go to this store. There's a couple of messages, which is great, because I know we got people from the UK, we got people from Pittsburgh, we got people from, so, I get this one down the street at Silver Springs Liquor, but if you don't live there, then that's not going to help you. So, alcohol in that way, I think it's valuable to have on hand. I have a little bit, actually I have a lot, because of that cider I was given, 250 liters. Plus I regularly make my own. Sometimes it's 1 gallons, 6 gallons. And I do actually want to scale up and start making my own spirits. But again, that's illegal. It's a highly specialized process that takes skill, and that's just my journey. I'm gonna learn and add that to my repertoire. Okay, I could definitely not go without mentioning chocolate. In a grid down situation, you want some chocolate, right? So having a little store of some chocolate in your pantry, and again, maybe it's getting that extra bar, or it's having a little bit in the stash somewhere. And that could just be cacao powder, it could be cacao paste. Those things store very, very well long term. They really don't like break down or go off. So either having the raw ingredients to make your own chocolate, or just having pre-made chocolate, nice little store of it. It's a comfort food. It's, it'll lift your spirits regardless of what's going on. And maybe, could become a little barter item as well. So I think I've covered. Anything else that anyone else type in the comments if there's any kind of like category or, glaringly obvious, like, wow, you didn't talk about, X. I was just thinking about kind of what's in my pantry, what I've been building up when it comes to food. I'll just mention a few things related to medicine, right? So we talked about alcohol. I think this should be, to sterilize, rubbing alcohol, first aid, as well as for making your own tinctures, a medicine cabinet. So like I mentioned, when, the family, we all kind of came down with the sniffles. Wasn't COVID. I mean, maybe it was, who knows? I don't know. I didn't get tested, or I'll never get tested. I don't care. But, we had everything we needed, right? In terms of, okay, we got our vitamin C, we got some zinc, we got this, we got the herbs that we need, like it was all there, ready, available, versus like, I got to go out, but I'm not feeling well. And I got to, like it was our medicine cabinet, for something like that was there stocked. When the pandemic, first hit, right? Everyone was freaking out. We had no idea what this was. People are going to get toilet paper, hand sanitizer, right? There was a run on all these kinds of things. And, it's just good to have a stock of it, right? In your home, you're set, you're good. So Alcohol is one, make your own tinctures, dried herbs. And I guess in this regard, think about teas. There's a lot of things, a lot of people can't live without coffee being number one, right? You want a nice little stash of caffeine, black tea, green tea, coffee, chocolate, mate, yeah, just for that alone, don't let the supply chain go down. But again, I've heard coffee prices are going to continue to rise because of just different environmental circumstances and supply chains. So if you can, you buy a little bit more now. It's savings for when the next time you might need to buy it. So one of the things that I worked on, and again, this is lifestyle. You're going to build up how you approach this, add a little bit more to your repertoire every single year. But one of the things that I've been working on is wildcrafting herbs, right? Understanding herbs, identifying them, their benefits, their properties, actually going out, picking them, making teas and tinctures and salves. Like developing your skills that way is so great. It's so empowering. And one of the things that I did this year, I mean, it sounds pretty small, but I'm stoked, is I grew and harvested all my own yarrow and all my own mint and all my own, what else did I get? A few different things. It wasn't, again, it's not the greatest success, but it felt really good. It's just like, hey, I know I have a year supply of yarrow, that I picked, that I grew and I dried and I've got it, like in my basement, and I drink it with tea, like regularly, the mint, those types of things. All my own valerian, right? Grew it, harvested it, tinctured it, I'm good for an entire year. I've got until next year, I've got all those herbs that I need. So that's kind of a fun thing. And this is where it gets individual. It may not be every single thing that you're like, I need a 6-month supply of all this stuff. One of the only things I have a year supply of are some of those herbs. So when you're thinking about herbs, you're thinking about medicine, you're thinking about first aid, think about nervines, right? The herbs that are calming, very soothing. Is that lemon balm? Is that chamomile? Is that valerian or skullcap? Those types of things can be very, very useful in any circumstance, right? Like pandemic 2, right? It's going to be way worse than pandemic 1. Well, wow, if shit really does hit the fan, some nice calming teas will be good while the lights are out or whatever happens. And immune boosting, right? So like I mentioned, okay, we got a cold. Okay, well, all the herbs, everything's right there. Pantry is stocked. Things that are pain relieving, right? What types of herbs that you can have on hand that are useful that way. So they can be in dried form, they can be in tinctures, they can be in capsules, however you want to do that. And then salves. This is something that I've also gotten into, making my own salves and oils. So instead of infusing a herb into water or into alcohol or into vinegar or that kind of a thing, I guess that's maybe a thing we didn't talk about, vinegar. But hey, when you make your own alcohol or you make your own kombucha, you're just a short step away from vinegar. And I know that can often be a big part of people's pantries. So a salve is just an oil infusion, right? It's like literally sticking the rosemary in the oil, or what I've done, pine pitch or spruce resin or balm of Gilead, the poplar buds infused into oil, extracts out the medicine, frankincense, those kinds of things. You can either have it as an oil, or if you make it into a salve or a balm, then you just add a bit of beeswax to kind of firm it up. And that can be great, right? You make your own, like, Vicks Vapor Rub or Tiger Balm. Could be pain relieving, could be, relieve congestion. Great thing to kind of have on hand. So not only do I have those that I've made throughout the year, but then I've also got the ingredients to make more, right? I've got extra oil, I've got beeswax, which, it's just separate, but, beeswax, for candles, for light, for heat, something else to think about. All right. Okay, cool. Oh yeah, Cindy, awesome. So Cindy keeps a storage of yeast, baking powder, baking soda. Awesome. Again, so inexpensive. Why not, right? You can get a year supply of that, and you might save a couple dollars, buying it in bulk and not having to buy it in a few months when it's gone up in price. So Michelle asks about syrups like elderberry. 100%. Yeah. So one of the things that I chugged in the last week was elderberry syrup, and it was just so easy. Like, went down to the pantry and it's like, yeah, there's the elderberry syrup. Because when I was in BC this summer traveling, there was fresh black elder. And got myself, the family, we got on harvesting it and brought it home, and I turned all of that into elderberry syrup. And alcohol preserves it, right? You can either add enough honey or enough sugar that preserves it, or you add in, moderate amount of honey, and then you add in alcohol. And so the minimum is 25% to preserve anything like this, a tincture or a syrup. You need at least 25% alcohol, and then that will preserve it forever. So, I'd done 3 bottles of elderberry syrup like this, and that's my winter supply. Here it's December, first time I got sick in a few years. Hopefully that's all we'll need. And Tatiana says, good bottle of whiskey for sure. Lori's talking about chicory root, dandelion root, burdock root. Yeah, awesome. Marissa's got late cellar dried elderberries. So those dried berries, so they'll last easily a year, no problem. And a lot of things like that. I mentioned, like the yarrow, the elderberry, the valerian, they might last longer than a year, but typically those kinds of things I'll think of in a kind of a year context of, okay, when's the next time that I'll be able to, that'll be ready to pick or harvest. A year is pretty good there. Okay, how long does coconut butter last? Because certainly one could, when you're talking about fats and oils, coconut butter, coconut oil, a long time. Yeah, easily a year, no problem. Way back in the day, even before I started Late Cellar, I used to buy coconut oil in 5-gallon tubs, because I was really into it, and it was kind of one of my primary sources of oil and fat back then. In 5-gallon tubs, no problem. A year, just keep it cool. But at the same time, coconut comes from tropical countries where it's hot, and it's typically liquid. It's warm all the time, and it doesn't go off in that sense. It's got a lot of compounds in it that resist bacteria, like caprylic acid, capric acid, and just at room temperature. All right, Stacey says, a big batch of fire cider on hand. Yeah, awesome. So I'm going to add a few things to my list. Vinegar, number 1. If that's something you use, I think it's a great thing to kind of have a store of it. Again, pretty easy and accessible to get a 1-gallon jug of apple cider. You can keep it plain, apple cider vinegar, I mean, or you can do things like what Stacey's created, like fire cider or herbal infused vinegars, and then use them culinarily or medicinally. All right, equipment. I noticed there was a question about jars, the best place to get jars. So I do recommend get yourself some jars, right? All different sizes, kinds. So all the way from 125s to 250s to 500s to 1 liters to 2 liters to 1-gallon glass jars, including glass jugs, plastic jugs. Like I'm like a container hound, and I've seen, most of this comes from China. Almost all the containers, a lot of it comes from China, and supply chain issues or whatever. Like, I've been surprised, to be honest. Maybe I listen to too much Ice Age Farmer, and I lean more towards the doomsday of like, supply chains are going down, costs are going up. Like I've been surprised. I thought we would have had more problems than we did, and I'm grateful we haven't. Like it's great. It's incredible that we haven't. It hasn't been as bad as I thought it might have been, in terms of price increases, as well as in terms of like, we just can't get it. But the one thing that we've consistently had issues with is jar supply, more than anything else. Definitely there have been the odd item here and there. We've definitely been price increases from the supply chains, but jars have been a big thing. So a friend of mine jokes, he's going into into the jar business. He's gonna like stockpile them and sell them for the collapse. But it is absolutely worthwhile. And I found, Canadian Tire, is maybe the best place that I found to get them. And, whatever you can afford, like one of each size or a couple of each size. I mean, I love these. I was, again, because I'd pick the mint from the garden or I'd harvest the yarrow or whatever, dry it, and then I just stuff them into jars. Or, you buy a bag of spice, and unless it's kind of sealed up in something really, really nice, I might want to put that into a jar, seal it myself. I would also recommend buying extra lids. In particular, I'm not a big fan of the plastic, but the plastic lids are good. So get these extra mason jar ball lids, and the plastic ones are good, especially for ferments where long-term storage can tend to kind of corrode the metal. They're great for tinctures. And really, I mean, at this stage, nothing is touching the plastic, so I'm not too worried about that. And then, of course, if you're going to be doing canning, you got all these jars, then extra lids are very helpful as well. We talked a little about water filters, having that portable, something gravity fed. The air sealer, like I mentioned, I never would have thought like how useful that has become and how much I like it. But that's a nice little tool. A dehydrator, good little tool as well. Not essential, especially if you live in Calgary. And most of my herbs actually don't. I just put them on the dehydrator racks, and then I just leave it. I actually don't even turn the dehydrator on. So depending on what it is, oftentimes you don't even need to turn it on. It's just very useful to have, a nice system of racks, but one can build that themselves. And typically a lot of drying of those types of herbs, you actually want to do it in the dark, away from direct sunlight. And then some things you do want to, they're ideal to like sun dry, like fruits and that type of thing. But the dehydrator is a good tool. If you have access to a freeze dryer, those things are pretty expensive, but I've met one or two people that actually have their own personal freeze dryer. Great. If you got it, go for it. A freezer, getting an extra one, right? Sticking it in the garage or sticking it in the basement. Scan Kijiji, see if you can find one that's cheap. It can be very useful. Any type of canning equipment, right? Beyond just the jars, large pots. What do you need to be able to can? We talked about buckets and those gamma lids, incredible. Tupperware, especially the big bins for doing your grains, or if you want to try out that veggies and sand. Crocks, like fermentation vessels. You can do a lot of fermentation in glass jars as well. You can get these, what are they called? Mason tops, little pickle pipes. So that just fits on. You would do that, and once the fermentation is done and it stopped pushing out gas, then you just take that off. You put a plastic or a metal lid on, and then that seals it up. But you can also get those big ceramic crocks as well. There's 5 liters, 10 liters, 15 liters, 25 liters. The largest ones we have at the shop anyways are 40 liters. They get pretty heavy, but I mean, again, this is what our ancestors did. I don't know if anybody has one of those old Medalta crocks, right? Some of those things were huge, like 60 liters, 80 liters, and that all the veggies for the year were in those pots, right? All the cabbage and a big giant thing of sauerkraut. And you can often find them secondhand. Although I did do that. I found it was a massive one. I've still got it at the shop. It's just on display. Filled it up first, like, the maiden voyage, like this beautiful Medalta crock. And we packed it full of cabbage. And then within an hour, it was all over the floor. There was a hairline crack in that one. And I guess that's the risk of when you're buying something secondhand. It's just saw it at a yard sale. And thought I scored, which I did, but it's actually unfunctional. So you can use it as a plant pot or just a decorative piece. But if you can get something nice and functional, then that's the best. Getting a little bit more into procuring our own food. We talked about wild foraging, hunting. Strings, hooks for wrapping, for hanging, candles. Other considerations, right? Have food for others if you can. This may not be something everyone wants to take on, but even random stuff. This guy who gave me like these juice boxes. It was like he had apple juice and orange juice, and he was gonna throw it out. I'm like, okay, I might as well take it, but this is something that I might either turn into alcohol, ferment that juice, or I could give it out. A lot of people kind of in the prepping community, they say, one of the best, safest things is never tell anyone that you prep, right? Because literally, like if there were a grid down situation, it says that society in any kind of like modern Western industrialized community, we've got about 3 days worth of food. And that would go even quicker if panic ensues, which no doubt it would. And people will get desperate when they get hungry, right? They smell the cooking, like they see lights on or whatever. So best thing, and not to kind of put fear into you, but just it's practicality. I'm putting myself out there by telling you like who I am and what I got. But I'd rather this should be commonplace. We shouldn't be in that space of kind of panicking because nobody is prepared. But best, just keep it to yourself, just quietly accumulate, because people will come, right? So that's a worst case scenario. You can assess for your own self the probabilities of that, but it's one thing to kind of have a store of food for yourself, but what are you going to do when other people need some, right? That's individual boundaries of you'll have to assess based upon the circumstance, but having extra for others, maybe if it's even decoys, why are some craft dinner or whatever. Or maybe somebody gifts you something. You're like, I don't really eat this, but I'll just throw it in the pantry. I've got the room, I've got the space. You can just sit in the basement and there it is. Worst case scenario, I might end up using it, or you donate it to the food bank, right? So, I'm not going to go too much into this discussion, but, as you build up this pantry, right, think about ways to protect yourself and that food, if it would ever get to that point, if you want to consider that. All right. Strategies if you're on a budget. I totally get it. Like if you go through that list and you buy everything tomorrow, you'll be spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars just to kind of get yourself enough food for maybe your goals 3 months, right? That's a lot. So space it out, right? Just slowly, just trying to accumulate, budget. Even if you did an extra, $10 a week, that's over a year, that's over $500 worth of food extra you're kind of adding to that pantry. But maybe hopefully you can do more. Buying in bulk is a good way to go. What about organizing a buying co-op, right? Like maybe you have literally like no money to do this, but you have friends, right? And you can be the one to organize it, right? Get a group together. Okay, who wants to think about this? Who wants to start buying in bulk? Who wants 25 pounds of rice, this, that, and the next? You're the one. You create the contacts, the connections. Everyone submits the order to you. You're the one that receives the big order. You divide it all up, and back out to the community in exchange for, a percentage, or, however you want to work it out. There's different ways to kind of strategize that. We talked a lot about wild crafting, right? Not only is it great on a budget, but the quality, superior access to wild crafted, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great lifestyle skill. Growing your own or volunteering at a farm, being part of a CSA, right? Community supported agriculture, right? So if you sign up, support a farm, they're going to give you more food than you can possibly deal with during the summer, hopefully, if it's a good year. And it won't, buying direct from farmer, buying co-ops. Here's another one, which may or may not be up your alley: dumpster diving. I did this years and years ago, and I got friends that still do it. And, I'm amazed, perfectly good quality food gets thrown out all the time. Planet Organic doesn't exist anymore, but that was one of the places that friends would go. And whether it was, cases of fruit, like just a dent in the peach, or it was, crackers that had expired, or, you name it. It was unbelievable, the amount of stuff that got dumpster dived. Or maybe it's arranging with like stores or restaurants that you can collect some of that stuff. I mean, who knows? We can really get creative. Of course, taking advantage of that summer abundance. all the apples that never get consumed. Like, it's, again, building it into your mindset, building into your lifestyle, that it's not just going day to day, week to week with food. You're starting to think more long term. Apples are ripe on the tree, no one's picking them, right? Like, how can I go out, access those, and store it? Think like a squirrel. It's in our human nature to do that. Maybe working part-time at a health food store or a grocery store, to get the discount, to be able to buy in bulk, to have access to those suppliers. Of course, developing skills, again, part of that lifestyle, things you can use. It's a fun hobby as well. It can be barterable, improve your lifestyle. And I think it's just kind of moving more towards the self-sufficiency, interdependence, and finding your tribe, right? Building community locally, literally starting on your street, in your neighborhood, who you can rely on, who you can go to, who you can be support for and with. This is a whole lifestyle. So, all right, let me go through kind of any comments. If you've got anything else that you want to type in, ask, or add, please do. All right, Jean is looking for a fire cider recipe with no citrus. Yeah, you could adapt any fire cider recipe and just don't add the citrus, right? The great thing about fire cider is you can add anything you want. It can be onions and garlic and turmeric and ginger and cayenne and chilies and you name it. And if the recipe calls for an orange or a lemon, just don't add it in. Amazon Marketplace, Facebook Marketplace, amazing for finding all kinds of jars and jugs locally and cheaply. Thanks for that. Stacy saying Rosemary Gladstar's book Fire Cider is full of recipes. Yeah, totally. Where do you get the 2-liter jars? Yeah, so these ones I got from Canadian Tire. Yeah, maybe there's an online retailer, you can find them. They're not always at Canadian Tire. There's, Walmart, I'm pretty sure, but I don't know, I never go to Walmart. Not that Canadian Tire is that much better, right? It's a store full of, cheap junk from China. That's kind of a, multinational conglomerate, but, yeah, those stores are out there because that's where I get those. Mylar bags. Yeah, totally. I'll mention that. Helpful for long-term storage of grains, nuts, seeds, beans. Totally. Yeah, Tatiana, important is fuel. So absolutely, we could expand this conversation beyond just food, right? It's like, great, got all your food, but how are you going to cook it? Yeah, so think about that. How are you going to heat your home, right? So it doesn't all freeze, or it's in the middle of summer and there's a heat wave and the power's out, and then what happens to your freezer? These are all different strategies and things that we want to be thinking about. Looking to invest into, biofuel fireplace for inside, rocket mass heater, those types of things. Co-op, that's another good place for those, for the 2-liter jars. And if you plan on harvesting your own food, you need ammunition. That's right. All right. Thanks, Helen. Some good things, some comments coming through. Olga, Stacy. Yeah, Lori. So that's the whole goal, was hopefully this gave you just a few more things to think about. Again, wasn't a complete list. It isn't a to-do list either. It's just kind of a perspective on things you might want to add and incorporate. And we got lots of other great suggestions coming in for this. And Debbie, yeah, awesome. I was thinking of you. Like for those that live in tiny condos, one thought was, okay, maybe you're not self-sufficient in food for 3 months, but maybe you're self-sufficient in, all your medicine, right? It can be compact, small little area. If there really is a deadly pandemic or something, or you get ill, right? And you got everything you need, first aid, emergency, your medicine, maybe that's what you focus on, right? If you're limited in space or limited in budget, customizing it. Layla, yeah, thank you. To go back to the apple thing, could you make something like apple puree to preserve it in a jar? Yeah, totally. Apple like jams, compotes, jellies, preserves. Actually, this brings up a point here, is I love books. And, so here's some ideas of things you want to kind of start stocking up on different books. So, wild crafting, this is something that I teach. We're actually going to do a winter wild foraging coming up in sometime in December. Denise just reached out. We should do this. So I'm totally on board with that. So, connecting, learning what's in your local area throughout all the seasons, getting a book, great reference for that. These old, herbal home remedies, you never know, right? It's just kind of fun collecting these books, I find as well. Little home remedies that, people traditionally, communities, cultures, civilizations, this knowledge that's been accumulated for so long that we've just kind of let by the wayside, right? All these skills that we're talking about, like canning and preserving and doing this and doing that, rendering fat. There's great series, like there's also one here called The Firefox. There's books 1, 2, and 3, maybe there's more. So this one kind of goes into, a lot of stuff beyond maybe than what I would ever do, but it's got moonshining. It's got planting by the signs, mountain crafts and foods, log cabin building, hog dressing, animal care, hide tanning, butter churns, midwifing, burial customs, right? Whoa, that's kind of a worst case scenario. I've heard people talk about that. It's like, what if, right? Like everybody on the street dies. How do we deal with bodies? We don't want to go there too much, but take it as far as you want. Spinning and weaving. So I think it's valuable to kind of collect some of these books that have these ancient knowledges and practices and start to learn them just for fun as a hobby, and maybe, who knows, you might need it. All right, Tatiana, she's got some binders way back, the Reader's Digest used for natural healing. Yeah, totally. So cool. Well, here we are. It's 8:30. We filled up the whole time. It was a great night. Really appreciated hanging out with you guys, and I learned some things too, and I've got some more to add to the list as well. So thanks for tuning in and joining me. I'll send the recording. Just if you want it, it'll be available afterwards. You're welcome to share it with anybody as well. So it'll just be up on YouTube there. And yeah, hope you had a good night. And all right. Yeah. Bye, everyone. Take care.